David Adonai orivi ishi mimi ira. Adonai ma'oz chayai mimi efchad. The Lord is my light and my help. Orivi ishi. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? Psalm 27. And the common practice is to read this psalm in our prayers from the beginning of the month of Elul, 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, all the way through the end of the holiday of Sukkot. So the tradition sees a connection between Psalm 27 and this period of the year, the introduction to the festivals, and of course the three festivals of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And in these few minutes, I'd like to suggest what the tradition sees in the psalm, as much as it makes that connection. So the psalm begins, the first few verses of Psalm 27 speak, it would appear in a confident voice, that God is my light and my redeemer. That's the first verse, I have no fear. Even if evil people come to harm me, to consume me, perhaps to slander me, le'echol et b'sari, different possibilities as to what that means, but do me harm for sure. They will stumble, they will fail. If those encamp against me, I have no fear. I have faith. That's how the psalm begins. It's a profession of faith. We have other such psalms, Psalm 23. Hashem ro'i lo, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We're familiar with such psalms. They're part of our tradition, part of our liturgy. But what's very striking about Psalm number 27 is the continuation. Beginning of the next verse, verse number 4, Achad sha'alti mi'et Adonai ota avakesh, shivti b'veit Adonai kol yemei chayai, lachazot b'noam Adonai ulevaker b'heichalo. One thing I ask of God, only that do I seek. What is the one thing? To dwell, to live in the house of God all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. Ulevaker b'heichalo. I'll get back to what the meaning of levaker might be. So we have a request. And in thinking about the psalm in conjunction with the festivals, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, let's start with Rosh Hashanah, the first festival, the beginning of the month of Tishrei. And the main prayer of Rosh Hashanah, of course, there's the shofar. But in conjunction with the shofar, the fundamental classical prayer of Rosh Hashanah, which is recited together with the sounding of the shofar, are the three blessings that we encounter, called Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. The main service of Rosh Hashanah has three special blessings. The first is called the Kingship Blessing. The second is Remembrances. The third is Shofar. And when one looks at the text, the classical text, the first of these speaks of God's existence. God is the king. God is the sovereign. That's the first, one might say, statement of faith. And we can understand that in different ways. My own understanding is that what it's really saying is, for me, that there's a purpose to this existence. There's a purpose to the world. And then it moves to the second, Remembrances, which has several different meanings in the liturgy, but begins, Ata zocher ma'aseh olam, ufokei kol yitzurei kedem. It speaks of the day of judgment. The idea of accountability, that what we do makes a difference. We are held accountable for our actions. We call that zichronot. It then moves in the liturgy, and it's very interesting, not our topic for now, but it moves to other things as well. It ends up with covenant, with relationship. There is a purpose, there is a God, there is a meaning. We humans are held accountable, and shofarot in the liturgy is all about revelation, encountering the divine. There are opportunities in our lives and in history. There are moments when we encounter the divine. We feel we are in the presence of the divine. Those are the three basic blessings of Rosh Hashanah. And we have in our prayer service of Rosh Hashanah, very unusual for us, I would say kind of statement of faith. We believe, whatever that means for us. It's a statement of belief. And that's how this psalm begins. God is my light, God is my salvation. And then it moves to something else, which is a request. I request that I be in God's presence. Achat sha'alti. I have one request. Being in God's presence, as spelled out in the psalm, means God's protective presence. Protect me from my enemies, all kinds of enemies, adversaries. And I wish to gaze at the beauty of the Lord, ulevaker beheichalo. What does ulevaker beheichalo mean? So a bikur in modern Hebrew means to visit the temple. It means that the person isn't actually in God's presence all the time. The psalmist is living a life in many places, many adversaries. It's attributed to David. David is all over the place. But the aspiration is, wherever I go, to see myself in God's presence. Levaker is an interesting word, because whereas in modern Hebrew it means to visit, but in biblical Hebrew, a bikoret is an examination or an investigation. In fact, the word boker, which means the morning, vayi erev, vayi boker, it was evening, it was day, it was boker. Erev is related to the word la'arev, to mix together. At night, things are not clear, they're not distinct. But boker is the time when we can make distinctions. We can see clarity. So perhaps what it means here is to be in God's presence and to be clear, to gain clarity in my life. In fact, that's how the psalm begins. God is my light. God may be my light in some theoretical sense, but it doesn't mean that I see God as my light, that I feel I know where I'm going, a sense of direction. So I'm seeking a sense of direction, instruction, direction, levaker beheichalo. And that's the second part of the psalm. I want to be in God's presence. The truth of the matter is the festival, which represents being in the presence of God, being in a kind of mini temple. Of course, that's the holiday of Sukkot. And in fact, the second part of the psalm speaks of God's protective presence. He is beneni b'sukkah. God will shelter me in God's pavilion, b'sukkah. A sukkah is a place of protection, a cover of protection. That's the aspiration, wherever I go, to feel I'm in God's presence. And then, the last part of the psalm is a petition. Shema Adonai v'chanek koli ekra v'chaneni v'aneni in verse 7. It's a petition. Hear God when I cry aloud. Chaneni, have mercy on me. Treat me graciously. Aneni, respond to me. L'cha amar libi, verse number 8, a difficult verse. L'cha amar libi. Libi is my heart or my mind in biblical Hebrew. My heart says, Bakshu panai, seek my face. Et panecha Adonai avakesh, O Lord, I seek your face. Verse number 8 is a difficult verse. It could mean that my heart says to me, tells me, my mind is reminding me what God says to me, seek me out. And I will. Et panecha, I will seek out your face. That's one possibility. The second possibility, perhaps a bit less likely to be the most plausible reading of the text, but to me, I hear God saying, or perhaps it means I say to God, Bakshu panai, seek me out. Now, Bakshu is a plural. Sometimes in the Bible, God takes the plural. The singular God sometimes takes the plural. I hear God saying, seek me out, or I hear me saying to God, seek me out, and I will seek out your face. And then the continuation is, Al tashte panecha mimeni, do not hide your face from me. So what's interesting is these verses, verse number 7, verse 8 and 9, speak about God's face. Chaneni, treat me graciously with chen, with grace. And what's interesting is that in the story of the Torah, one of the critical stories of the Torah, the episode of the golden calf, Moses comes down the mountain, the people are dancing around the golden calf. God says to Moshe, after there's a civil war, I can't accompany the people, I can't be in their midst. I'll send an angel, I'll send a messenger. I can't be with you. And Moshe tries to reconcile God and the people. At one point, Moshe turns to God in Exodus chapter 33 and says, you're not going to go with them. You haven't said whom you will send with me. And God's response is, my face will accompany you. And Moshe says, if you go with me, you go with them. And after all, if I and the people find grace in your eyes, you will go with us. And God says, yes, I agree. I will go with both of you. I will go with you. I will go with them. You have found grace in my eyes. The Yom Kippur service is all about the golden calf. The golden calf is a story that is behind Yom Kippur. It's about reconciliation. It's about the 13 attributes of faith. And the request, of course, of Moshe is, Panecha, we want to be in your presence. Don't hide your face from us, from me and from them. So the psalm actually reflects all three holidays. It begins with statements of faith, and then the request, the ultimate request, wherever I go to be in God's presence, and then the recognition of the gap between the aspiration and the reality. Shema Adonai v'chaneni, treat me graciously. I would say in conclusion that what's interesting is that at the end of our daily service, our Amidah, our silent prayer, the last blessing is a blessing for peace, Sim Shalom. The blessing for peace at the end of the Amidah is based on actually the priestly blessing. There are three priestly blessings. And the second is, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha vichuneka. God should shine God's countenance, God's face upon you. Vichuneka, and be gracious to you. And that strikes me as very connected to Psalm 27. Psalm 27 is all about the request to be in God's presence, God's face. Vichuneka, chaneni. Every day we are praying, we are asking God for enlightenment. Shine your countenance upon us. Ori v'yishi, God is my light. That is to say, God gives me clarity in life. We seek clarity. We want to understand what the right thing to do is at the moment. We often feel we don't have the clarity. We are praying for clarity, for direction. And we ask that God shine God's countenance upon us. Ori v'yishi, the priestly blessing, God should shine God's countenance upon you, v'yichuneka, and treat you graciously.